just to be fun, to switch it up, I told the caller that they'd be called, but I'm not telling you guys who the caller is.
Right. Okay, I'm ready.
What if the caller called me?
Put these digits in.
All right, 815.
Okay.
You don't want the area code?
No. I should, whatever, go on.
Hi, this is Joelson. I cannot get to my phone right now, so if you'd like to leave your name and number,
Can I
get
get
back
to my
you as soon
phone?
as I can.
He just said ready.
At the tone, please record your message. When you've finished recording, you may hang up or press 1 for more options.
Well, that's all right. We can just talk for a little while then while he gets his shit together.
Is this just a really long voicemail we're leaving for Joe? Let's do it.
Yeah, that's fine.
It's an entire podcast episode voicemail.
No, that was definitely him. It was his voice.
Yeah, no, it definitely, yeah. Just,
I don't think that must have been a different Joe Holmes.
Okay, he said it didn't ring. Let's just try again.
Okay.
I made it. Hello.
Welcome to the Speech Guys.
Yeah, lead the way there.
Wow.
So
great to have you, Joe. We've been chasing after Joe Olofsson for years. Couldn't get our schedules to match up.
I have to say I'm honored that you guys would persevere after all the times I told you no. I really feel like this has been a long time coming. Thank you.
We have a special ask tonight. So tonight is the start of season 3.
Hey, why don't we hear a little bit about who this Joe Olofsson is? I'm pronouncing his name probably for the first time my entire life at this point. So that's one thing. Dude, let's introduce the world. Let's introduce the world to Joe. Ross or Matt, can you explain who he is?
So Joe is a physical therapist that lives in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So Joe went to PT school with Matt and I. He was our roommate our first year there. I believe I might have referenced in a prior episode some tall guy with sandals and really long hair and a skateboard. The first time I met him, that was Joe, who has a beautiful wife, Kara. He's a good friend of the Speech Guys. That's all I got. Matt, anything to add?
You covered most of it. He was like an original Speech Guy, wasn't he? Because he was living with you guys when you started it.
Oh, yeah. That's right.
Yeah, do you remember?
Right.
Wow.
He was a Speech Guy before I was.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I think I floated around for a little bit of it, but I've never participated. So this is a big step forward for me.
Well, just remember, you're not participating too long. We're going to cut you off after about 4 minutes. We don't need any of your far left agenda to mess up our audience expectations.
I'll come in swinging the sickle pretty hard if you let me.
Is that the communist swickle?
Yeah.
Speaking,
that was the joke.
Speaking of far left, how about people who once left their country for another one, like Robert E. Lee? What do you know about Robert E. Lee? I mean, what were your thoughts getting roped into this intro?
Yeah, I like the Civil War. I don't know a ton about it, so I can't really speak too much on Robert E. Lee. I'm trying not to read in too far into the title of this one that's called Speeches by Losers.
Oh, yeah.
You might have asked me to intro this one. So
sounds like you're reading between the lines.
Yeah, I can't not see it, So so Speeches by Losers. I know what the speech is about. And it's about a letter that Robert E. Lee wrote to his wife after losing Gettysburg, which, as I understand, was a pretty pivotal turning point in the Civil War, if not the end. So I'm sure you guys have a lot more prepared.
Hey, you already know way more than most of our introducers know. I mean,
I've been
well prepared.
Wikipedia before, just in case. But yeah, I won't take up any more of your time before you guys get into the topic. And I want to just break into season 3 by introducing the Speech Guys. We've got Ross, sometimes wears Julie's lip gloss Johnson. We've got Landon, the man, then free. Fry.
Whoa, nice.
I'm not sure. I thought it was Fry. But I'm pretty sure it's free unless Matt and Ross are both playing a prank on me. Which if they did, they coordinated it really well. We've got
Wish we were
Mike
that good.
still rides the strike, Schaefer.
Ouch.
And we've got Matt has never beaten Joe in wrestling. Schultz.
Nice.
All right. You guys are in for an action-packed episode. I'm sure of it. And with that, let's cue the music.
Nice. Love it.
All right.
Dang, dude.
When you see the road,
Michael Schaefer, Ross Johnson, Matt Schultz, and Landon Fry are all here.
It's free. Free.
perspective, I've been back in
I'm just going to say it. I've been thinking it for 10 minutes. I don't want a podcast scared.
Oh, yeah.
ashes. Now I've seen the road.
Pregnancy is a beautiful thing. Pregnancy is a gift.
Shit. Oh, there are stories to tell.
What kind of paint sticks to asteroids? Like, if you don't prime your wall.
Afraid some days, but the road will lead us to a better place.
We are called to emerge from that default setting of self-involvement.
Okay, here we go. Thanks for Joe for introducing the episode there. Ross is going to be lead-off batter for the next speech series for Season 3, Speeches by Losers. Ross, what do you got tonight?
So tonight, we are looking at a letter from General Robert E. Lee, penned to his wife several days after losing the Battle of Gettysburg in the Civil War. So that will be what we're going over tonight. Little shout out before we formally begin. My fourth child was born a couple weeks ago, so we got Joseph Robert Johnson, the newest speech guy.
Not a loser at all.
Not a loser at all. He's a winner. I'm choosing these speeches to show him what not to be.
I was clapping for your wife.
Yeah, she did great. 27 minutes in the delivery room before he was born. So beat her personal best. Yep. It was quite a stressful half an hour there. Pretty rough. It iced that night. So the roads weren't great. Had to go in through the emergency room. So a little more stress. I mean, it's always a little stressful going to the hospital.
Yeah.
But knowing our past one had come quickly, we assumed he would come quickly. Not great roads, getting to the hospital, and 27 minutes in the delivery room. So
they don't charge by the minute.
Nope. So one doctor had to deliver him because the OB wasn't there yet. But then, of course, the OB still came. He actually was about 5 to 10 minutes late, and I think his exact words were, "I missed it." But he still came on in and made sure everything was okay. So I'm sure we'll get billed for both somehow. But,
yeah.
diving into the podcast. So I don't remember who had the idea doing speeches by losers. Mike, I think it was yours.
I think it was mine. I believe we were driving back from, was it last spring? Way back in last spring, it first came up, driving back from Illini State Park.
That actually does sound familiar. I know it was after one of our camping trips, but I think that's right, because I don't think it was our fall rendezvous.
Yeah, I can picture us driving down Interstate 39.
It's a compelling thought. I think your mind, there's a lot of ways we could take this.
Why? So we don't get lost in the weeds here, Ross. Why don't you go ahead and open up with Lee reading an excerpt from that letter?
So it's pretty short. Should I read the whole thing, or do you want just an excerpt?
Yeah, the excerpt that you have posted on the outline.
All right. So again, this is Robert E. Lee, a letter to his wife, July 12th, 1863. When did Gettysburg end? Was it the 3rd or the 5th? Anyway, so this is him, and it's not a very long one. I think what I actually have might be an excerpt of the letter, but we'll do an excerpt of the excerpt. So, the consequences of war. are horrid enough at best, surrounded by all the ameliorations of civilization and Christianity. I am very sorry for the injuries done the family at Hickory Hill, and particularly that our dear old Uncle Williams in his 80th year should be subjected to such treatment. But we cannot help it and must endure it. You will, however, learn before this reaches you that our success at Gettysburg was not so great as reported. In fact, that we failed to drive the enemy from his position, and that our army withdrew to the Potomac. Had the river not unexpectedly risen, all would have been well with us, but God in his all-wise providence willed otherwise, and our communications have been interrupted and almost cut off. The waters have subsided to about 4 feet, and if they continue by tomorrow, I hope our communications will be open. I trust that a merciful God, our only hope and refuge, will not desert us in this hour of need, and will deliver us by his almighty hand, that the whole world may recognize his power and all hearts be lifted up in adoration and praise of his unbounded loving kindness. We must, however, submit to his almighty will, whatever that may be. May God guide and protect us all, and is my constant prayer. So there's the excerpt. I actually, when we started talking speeches by losers, this came to my mind pretty quickly. Landon, I think we probably have told you about our trip to Gettysburg before.
I'd like to hear more now. I think take it from the top.
Let's see. So when we're in graduate school, our friend Danny McShane was studying to be he's now Father Danny McShane, studying out in seminary in Emmitsburg, Maryland. I believe Mount St. Mary's, I think might be the name, but it's very close to Gettysburg. And a group of us went out in my parents' van, actually. And I think Matt wanted to take a car, but it would have been 5 guys in a 5-seat car, and I would have been so crammed in there. And Matt wanted to save the 78 cents in gas money, but we didn't. And we went to visit Danny, and on the trip, we went to Gettysburg to kind of check it out and do a tour, and we did a rather in-depth tour of Gettysburg. We stopped everywhere and talked about lots, and one of the things Danny did for us was he had different, not necessarily letters, but just bits of writings of different figures from the Civil War. So at different points, we would stop and read them. So at one point we stopped, and this letter was mine. And then I think Mike read Abraham Lincoln. Matt, you actually read a priest that was somehow involved, I believe. And then we just had other figures as well. Joshua Chamberlain, I think, was one. I still have them, most of them. But anyway, so this speech, it kind of stuck out to me at the time, honestly. So it stuck with me a little bit. And yeah, so it was a pretty easy pick for speeches by losers.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. That was a fun little surprise that Father McShane had for us to sort of deliver. And obviously, he was just sort of insinuating Matt was the holy one, and Ross was the conflicted traitor, and I was the hero.
In terms of the speeches,
of just life in general. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So we knew the speeches by losers quad, but when I sent out Robert E. Lee, before you saw letter to his wife or read the letter, what was your first thought when you saw Robert E. Lee? Because I feel like speeches by losers, like we said, could go a lot of different ways.
Obviously, Robert E. Lee is just an interesting figure because, I think all of us, except Landon's probably a little bit more historically just plugged in, have the at least conception or understanding that Robert E. Lee was the guy who was against slavery more generally, certainly more so than most people in the South, but chose to fight for the South for being honorable or faithful to his state. Obviously, it's an interesting idea to sort of try to unpack that a little bit more. Not since high school if we spent so much time reading and watching videos on Robert E. Lee. So why don't I just do first reactions on speech itself too at the same time, I feel like. Yeah, I was expecting a speech like more from the end of the whole war, but some would argue, as I was reading, that Gettysburg was the last like major powerful move attempted by the South. So even though it took place almost 2 years before the end of the war, it is in a sense the end of the war. One of the notes that I made for the content itself, other than just like the interesting commentary on old Uncle Williams and who that is, which I figured out. But yeah, just especially that last line where that Ross has sort of started trying to give the speech. I trust the merciful God will not desert us in this hour of need. We must submit to his almighty will, whatever that may be. It's so beautifully written. And I think the most just superficial person would perceive Robert E. Lee as just this like evil person, right? Because he was fighting ultimately to support this institution, which just utterly minimized to almost the greatest possible extent just the dignity of a person. But at the same time, there's just this real beautiful oratory, beautiful art, beautiful sensibility to those things which are transcendent and beyond us, right? The Christian God in this case. To see that beauty juxtaposed to something so disgusting that he was ultimately trying to protect, like the note I made is like, this segment of the speech, this letter, should be taught in high school classrooms. It's just a lesson on the complexity, the antagonism of human nature. Just in the same way, like the two thieves at Jesus' side on the cross, like both of them got there for the exact same reason, but to Christ's one side is the man who has promised salvation, the only person promised salvation in the Bible, and the other one who is presumably damned because of his desire to rebel and not repent from it. Just that antagonism of human nature that's so interesting, I think, and comes across in this letter was sort of the thing that sticks out to me.
Yeah, no, I think the segment that you highlighted when you kind of made the comments about just how beautifully written it was, and just the complexity of human nature was definitely, that was definitely the part that stood out to me as well. And I think, we'll kind of talk about this more later, I'm sure, but just kind of speaks to like, what is it? So I know we're going to talk about like how to lose gracefully and like accept and that, but like what is required ahead of time to do that? Because like, I don't know about you guys, but losses just like, they get me. I stink at I'm very capable of losing. I'm very good at losing. but
Matt loses a lot, mind you.
But yeah, like they really affect me, and it's a type of thing that can hit you quickly, and you're not always going to have the ability to just like pause and like think about how to act, So like there kind of needs to be some things you've done to your soul to build it up ahead of time. Otherwise, like, at least I am prone to just say and do bad things whenever I'm embarrassed by a loss or something. So, I think it speaks to, a very high degree of virtue and like, just like a very firm, sense of identity, in terms of like who he is, like not what he's fighting for, like short term, like in the immediate sense of like the Battle of Gettysburg, but like what he's fighting for, like, the bigger picture of his life and whatnot. So
when you think of losers, I think this is a pretty obvious pick for the first or second slot. I do on the speech itself, the first thing that came to my mind to contrast it to, which came from the same time period, but would be Lincoln's second inaugural, where he was just grappling with Lincoln. Kind of that speech was almost like a sermon, and he was grappling like, all right, we've completed this thing, was God on our side or not? And like, hopefully, we shouldn't pray to that God's on our side, but that we're on his side. And I think you almost see some of that coming through Lee's words. Like, I think it's even interesting in Lincoln's second inaugural. I mean, he just came out and said, like, both sides of this war read from the same Bible and pray to the same God and invokes the Almighty's aid against the other. And so, yeah, just big picture, like, it was a division of brothers that brought on this war over, certain sins. I think you can kind of see Lee grasping with that a little, like where he's drawn his lines and how to think about it. But I think you can see from Lincoln's second inaugural that both sides are clearly trying to figure it out or win, or at least in Lee's example, maybe not win, but just whatever was going through his head.
As I read it, I mean, yeah, just the fact of kind of the invoking God's will, and especially kind of this beautifully orated thing, and like kind of like you said, Mike, and juxtaposition, like, yeah, and contrast, I guess, to, this terrible, ugly thing of just war and slavery and all this stuff. But it almost, when I read it, I mean, so I looked up. So Gettysburg was July 1st through 3rd. So, I mean, this is only 9 days after Gettysburg. So, I mean, just thinking about, I mean, that's a multiple day battle, and he's, the general of the South. So just, I can't imagine just the stress levels, fatigue, having to retreat, think on your feet, didn't go as planned, just kind of the stress, fatigue of battle and war, like what that would bring on in combination with, like you said, just losing, having to withdraw from this very pivotal battle in this war that, he's been tasked to win. I don't know. So I feel like if at any point you're going to see somebody that's just worn out, tired, afraid, what's going to happen? Am I going to be, is the president going to take my job away? I mean, if at any point you're going to see somebody kind of quote unquote at their worst, it seems like this would be a decent example of it. And reading through the letter, it seems almost, I kind of used the word cold in my description, and I didn't mean like there just didn't seem to be a lot of emotion there. Stoic. It just kind of was like, honestly, I was somewhat baffled just because I was just having a hard time. Like, I don't know, did he write this quickly? I had a hard time believing he's just this unmoved at this point of the war. So then I look and find a letter he wrote to Jefferson Davis, president of the Confederacy, actually a couple of days before this. So he wrote this letter on July 8th, so only 5 days after the battle. And it kind of has the same tone to it, honestly. Kind of explains the situation. He even says at one point, I shall therefore have to accept battle if the enemy offers it, whether I wish it or not. Just kind of, okay, so we're going to have to do that. If they come, we'll have to fight them. And just this kind of blunt, stoic, if you will, letter he wrote to Jefferson Davis. So anyway, I was just kind of having this kind of difficulty placing what was this guy thinking right now. And then I felt better because I read apparently when he surrendered. So Robert E. Lee formally surrendered to General Ulysses Grant for the Union, obviously to end the war. And Grant said pretty much the same thing. I've tried to find it if I can, but I think at one point he actually said, like, I don't know. I feel like I don't want to butcher it, but he pretty much said, I don't know what Lee was thinking. And not like in a crazy way, just like a kind of had a hard time getting a read on him because it was so kind of the same thing. So anyway, I feel like that was kind of my take, was just, and I don't even have a fine point on it because it just was still a little bit in my mind, just kind of something didn't sit with it.
Well, I think that is a good sort of platform to sort of pivot to just the next sort of strand of thought here, is that, yeah, Grant didn't know what he was thinking. Maybe you can look up the exact quote while I babble a little bit here. But yeah, like, he didn't know what he was thinking. So we think about circumstances in our own lives where we lose, or just someone around us loses in either some sort of small way or some bigger way. And, there's different ways that we can observe that manifestation of that loss, right? They can, if they're really, really young, right, they might cry about it, literally. if they're a little bit older, then they're probably not crying, but they might be like way too emotional about their loss. But and this is what I commented on, is probably a little bit more of the default setting, or like the thing that requires a little bit more like force or energy for the average person to pull away from, even if they're like fairly mature, is that it's that desire to make excuses is not quite the right word, but to sort of just like explain their loss. It's as if they're not lying about it, not making anything up, but it's this desire to say, well, the reason I lost, or I didn't do well, or I didn't send this route climbing was because of this, this, and this. But I think that the most mature, the most noble thing is something Robert E. Lee here is just to acknowledge the fact that I lost. It didn't turn out how I'd hoped. And that's it. And what I think how that connects to Grant and Lee here is that what that does, I think two things happen. One, it makes you more potent, I think is maybe the right word, as someone who interacts with others, right? It's like if someone watches us just break down or just become over invested in this loss, it's like, wow, I know exactly what that guy or girl is thinking, what's on their mind. It's like you're an open book. It's just like in romance, which we'll talk about in the next episode. And Lucy's like, girls do not like open book guys, right? You need to have a certain amount of mystery. It goes both directions. You need a certain amount of mystery to them. And if you're just pouring your heart out because of how you lost this particular thing, that's not interesting and engaging to others. And then nor does that exactly give you a very solid platform to move forward on, because you're dwelling on this thing, right? But if you don't spend too much hardware, don't give too much physical energy towards investigating this loss that you had or manifesting it, then it allows you to devote that energy towards moving forward. So I think that's sort of the thing that is relevant to all times and all places that Grant was observing. He did not know what Lee was thinking, sort of a euphemism for that stoic individual in our lives who is mysterious and able to sort of accept losses as they are and move forward.
So Grant didn't know what Lee was thinking. That happened at Appomattox Courthouse in 1865 was the final scene. I think a couple things I've read about that day that I found interesting. Lee was like dressed to the nines. Like he went out of his way to like put on like his best, most cleanest. He rode in on a white horse, super sharp. I wondered, what does that mean? I don't know. I think you could tend to be like, well, if I've given up and like I surrender myself, like I have nothing more, like you could come across as perhaps like frumpy and downtrodden, whatever, but he wasn't. On the other side, Grant, I think, was the frumpy one and like was pretty disheveled, and that was a little bit who he was and didn't go out of his way to dress up. The conversation but that happened between them, I think one thing that was interesting was, Grant gave some fairly good term. The other thing Lee said before he went in, he was like, I'm going to go in and surrender, and like I give the order, like nobody can like lead a rebellion or like keep on fighting or like, spread out the troops and let's guerrilla warfare for this for a while. He specifically was like, that's just going to make us bleed forever. And like, we have to end this, and I'm going to go surrender, and the order needs carried through that this is all completely over. Put down your arms. Grant allowed them to all go home with a horse and a gun. Lee accepted that, and then even kind of like humility kicked in, and he asked for like food provisions, and Grant offered some. That was the one time Grant read his face. Lee was like, that might not be enough, and Grant like tripled the number and was like, oh, you don't need 9,000? Like we can give you 25,000 like rations. And Lee's army was so at the end of their ropes. Like Lee was surprised that the North could just hand over like 25,000 meals so easily. And Lee was like, yes, that would be great. Like, we would take those. And didn't even have pride there to like not refuse to refuse a meal. I think it's an important retreat, and there was certainly mystery. Grant didn't know how to take it. They were barely, just a couple historical facts. They did spend some time at West Point together. They weren't in the same class, but were there. And then Lee was really high up in the war, the Mexican War. Grant was more of a foot soldier, but they had like basically followed the same path. Lee a few years older and more of like the A+ student. Grant was like the one just getting by who could ride a horse really well. And so it would definitely be like, imagine yourself totally winning, and having to like accept defeat from like the person you most admire who's like 15 years older than you. Like just like your worst like peer / enemy who's like steps further of you in your career or life, like you welcoming them into your office and like having to accept their defeat. Like that's the situation that they were in. And Grant at the beginning was like trying to make like small talk, like, hey, I don't know what he said, but it was like small talk. And Lee was just like, cut the crap. Like, we're here to settle up and let's just do that. Cause like, I have to surrender to you. A guy who I kind of heard was like, you were that kid back at college. I don't even really know who you are, other than like, now you're this guy that I have to do this thing with.
Well, one thing I was thinking about as you were describing all this is just like all of the possible bad reactions to a loss that I know I've had in different times. Like, I know, Mike, you mentioned like the over-explaining yourself. Just trying to like save some sense of competence. Like, why you lost, but that somehow makes you smarter or better or whatever. But there's like the I don't care, defeatist, who cares, whatever, like that sort of thing. There's like anger, frustration. There's this sort of like withdrawal. There's this sort of like beating yourself up over things, and just how all of these dynamics and ways you could respond were kind of quantified, like you could be like, oh, we don't need your help. We don't need extra meal. You know what I mean? Like there are so many opportunities for these things that like we don't have ways to like measure or quantify, but like obviously in this situation, it's like, trying to advocate for your men for, different rights, for a horse and a gun, for meals, whatever. Just how all of that is quantified in this situation is interesting.
I really like the not explaining why you lose thing. That actually, I think I read that in a book by John Wooden, and no joke, that like exact idea had a big impact on me when I was like, I don't know, I'm going to guess 14 years old. Like that hit me really hard. Like, oh, like that's what you do as a man. I'm not saying I do it great. You guys can tell me, but I like that exact point I've tried to live out for years. And I feel like because I'm so conscious of that, I notice it's like you kind of notice the contrast. So I feel like I'm more hyper aware when people do the opposite. And it's unbelievable, I think, how often people do the opposite. Like, I mean, in the workplace, you name any situation ever, and it's like the second you bring up, even if you're not like directly blaming them, like so fast to, I mean, even if it's accurate, like we'll call it an excuse, but like offer up the reason, and it's just insane to me. But yeah, as far as the Grant Lee thing, so I did find it, so I think I'll read it because I think it fits super well with what you guys have been saying. So again, just Landon, you obviously set the stage, but so Robert E. Lee is a big figure, right? Even at this time, right? The North kind of had to move around, had different leaders and generals, but I mean, Robert E. Lee was kind of like the guy from the get-go for the South. He was the guy, So anyway, you've got that, and then as far as if Lee wasn't moved by it or if he wasn't sad or whatever, this is his words. He said after he made the decision to surrender, there is nothing left me but to go and see General Grant, and I would rather die 1,000 deaths. So he's not just emotionless. It's not like he doesn't care. He's obviously pretty moved by this whole thing. And yet this is what Grant said after it. What General Lee's feelings were, I do not know. As he was a man of much dignity with an impassible face, it was impossible to say whether he felt inwardly glad that the end had finally come or felt sad over the result and was too manly to show it. Whatever his feelings, they were entirely concealed from my observation. But my own feelings, which had been quite jubilant on the receipt of his letter, were sad and depressed. I felt like anything rather than rejoicing over the downfall of a foe who had fought so long and valiantly and had suffered much for a cause. Yeah, so that's General Grant's own words. I think, too, it's easy to, I don't know, and I guess we kind of talked about it, but just like hearing us talk, I think just Lee's kind of, I don't want to say like Lee's complexity, because I think we can kind of use it as a way to see how like everybody's, I guess, in a way. But like, I feel like it's easy to, I don't know, just kind of, I want to highlight, like, it's easy to, for both sides, like, not both sides, but, you know, someone could look at him and really stress, oh, he was against slavery. He was only fighting for his, like, his state, his country, where he was from, and try to, like, build him up in this super, like, heroic way. But then at the same time, like, you can't write off, like, he was also fighting for the South. And, like, that a huge part of that was slavery, you know, and the slavery of an entire race of human beings, which is obviously a pretty terrible thing. So anyway, that's just whole, like I said, just I don't feel like I really had a fine like articulation of how, like, just reading through these things and thinking about Robert E. Lee and the situation. I just was left very, just like not grasping, but just questioning afterwards. Just didn't have a solid take on him.
This might be a little bit of a pivot, so if we want to stay on this, let me know and we'll come back to this later. But can you guys think of any good examples of a non-stoic but still manly loss? You know what I mean? Because I feel like so one that came to mind for me was like Odysseus. You know, whenever he suffered some defeat, and like usually when that happened, like a bunch of his men died or something, were eaten by a cyclops or drowned by a random monster or something. But like, so maybe it's more of a grief thing than losing in battle. But I don't know. I feel like he was just pretty emotional and just like and just rent his garments and and I feel like there might be. Which maybe Lee did that before, got it out of his system, and then went and surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse. But yeah, I guess I don't. Is there room for emotion? Because I think there might be. But yeah, it's hard to because I definitely like all the stuff we've been talking about resonates for sure in terms of like this sort of manly, composed, like way of accepting a loss. But at the same time, I feel like there might be like an emotional way a more emotionful, if that's a word, way to lose. I don't know.
He was a genteel man from the South and did not express his emotions.
That's an interesting question. I feel like I have in my mind, I thought a lot of just people losing poorly. And like, I have tons of examples of people doing a terrible job.
Oh, for sure.
But
no, definitely.
as far as like people who actually, maybe were somewhat stoic, or so we would still say, lost with dignity, yet didn't have this very composed manner.
Yeah, it's a weird balance to think about because like, yeah, I don't
want to steal too much thunder from, I guess I don't know what Mike's doing next week, but
I've got a brief thought to mix things up a little bit. That's on Matt's point. Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I mean, useful. I don't think that nuance has been introduced yet here. I think sort of a useful, more obvious parallel would be like, in the case of men, like a son losing his father, right? And whether or not he should cry in that scenario. And I think this is a good example of, the pendulum swinging in more of the opposite direction in a good way, right? Like, yeah, we can like, I've basically never seen my dad cry, but I've got a hunch that, God willing, if I had kids, they would like, I don't think I'd be embarrassed for them to see me cry like watching my dog skip. And yeah, I don't know. I honestly don't know how often you guys cry, but I think there is something
You guys cry,
value. I think there is something definitely valuable about not saying that my dad concealed his tears necessarily, but there is something inherently valuable about just allowing your tears to be seen. That, yeah, I mean, being sad, being heartbroken, in whatever way that is, like, is a very real, normal, good, like, that does not endanger your soul, I think is a good way to express that. And I don't know, it's a very natural, logical idea to say that, in contrast with, I'll put it out now since Ross put it out before too, something far less meaningful than the Civil War. You know, President Trump still whining about quote unquote losing.
I'm not a loser.
2 years later.
Joe Biden is a loser.
2 years later, right? Like, you know, if President Trump would have just cried in his bedroom the night after he lost, like, okay, fine. I'd say he's a little bit of a baby, but yeah, in contrast with a grief being elongated for 2 years, it's like, so yeah, to answer your question in short, Matt, yeah, there is something valuable about expressing your grief as a man or woman, and I think that's one thing that the millennials, the newbies, have gotten right, with men just being more comfortable with being a little more emotional. So yeah.
So what if one of the big things with Robert E. Lee is like, what do we do with the Robert E. Lee statues? Were they ever a monument? Well, 3 questions. Hold on, let me get this straight. 3 questions and then maybe a tie back. Was he a good loser? And was that what we needed? Were the monuments put up because he was a good loser?
Whoa.
Do we look at the monuments today because he was a good loser or not? Would they have stayed up if that is how we looked at them? And finally, was he the ultimate mimetic scapegoat that we needed?
Whoa, that was the one. That was the one.
I don't even know exactly the correlation with mimetic scapegoat. Oh yeah, I guess I do source
in conflict. We always need to like, did he offer himself up to lead a cause that was ultimately like just supposed to fail?
That he knew was going to fail.
When you read the speech,
yeah.
It's like, I mean, he's not like talking like a winner, right? Like, you don't get a sense of he's all out on this. Like, you get a sense more of like a very conflicted moral virtue. I'm just gonna like play the role as long as I should, and then show up in a white horse. And like we probably needed that to get past slavery.
Okay, briefly restate those 3 points.
Well, was he a good loser? Why has he been memorialized? Would that change if we memorialized him because of being a good loser? And then given like all these like torn sentiments, like it's kind of an odd letter, the text is torn, like was he playing a like almost like perfect scapegoat role to get that's just like what I'm piecing together in my head.
My first thoughts, I think, was he a good loser? I would say yes. Is that why he was memorialized? I'm going to say probably not. Would that change if it were? I think I would say it should, but no, probably wouldn't change how most people view it. When you said scapegoat, my thought was he like a scapegoat today? Like, is he the like, it's almost like there's so much energy and anger, like it needs directed at someone or something. So it was the Robert E. Lee statue. And he is in fact, 100 and some years, 50, 70 years after his death, like the scapegoat.
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was my first, when you first popped the question, there's a lot of questions there, so I was trying to keep up, but I think that's how I would go.
Honestly, yeah, I think that's pretty much right on.
Was he the scapegoat then, though? Did he just step up and play a role?
I don't know. I guess I don't get that sense. He seems to be, I mean, even like the other letter to Jefferson Davis even like shows him as like a very devout guy who seems to like be very rooted in his.
Finish that.
Well, yeah, I guess rooted in his faith and rooted in his like identity as like trying to serve God in some way, albeit like misguided in certain ways, certainly. But yeah, like that does seem to be a rather authentic, and it was in a day and age where like people did talk like that, and it, I don't know, maybe you can say that was just kind of like, oh, it's just, phrase, it didn't mean it, but like, I don't know. I guess to me it does seem authentic, and that's a central component of his identity. I don't know if he would necessarily just be like, well, all right, well, people are going to hate me, but
I also think, which I'm not a scholar on Robert E. Lee, but from the couple things that we've talked about that I've read, I would say this is like a good quality that people should want. Like, it's okay to be conflicted, and like when you have to make a decision, right? So I don't know how much conflict he had, because I know people can talk about how he was against slavery but still fought for the South. I don't know if he had to think about that for 2 weeks or if it was a no-brainer for him. But
it was in a sense 2 days based upon
2 days.
the letter.
Either way, like I think it's okay to have like conflict in the decision making in anything, but I think that there's something kind of virtuous or manly about like once you've made a decision, like you need to be all in and you need to see it through.
Yeah.
And he strikes me that would be like true to his character, and so even if there was some conflict in making the decision, it seems to me like once he made the decision, I would guess he was in it to win it.
Right. Yeah.
With the expectation that he would, or at least had a chance to. So
yeah, and that makes losing harder and his actions more impressive to lose if he was like 100% in it to win and not like at all aware of possible scapegoating and like leading a war that, I don't know, all the metrics, they had, I saw some stats like, half the population, 1/10 of the industrial might, almost just 1/4 of the fighting abled men to like compete against the war. Like they're always probably going to lose if you did know all the stats. Maybe you didn't. Maybe those stats are just like 20/20 hindsight and just like defending the North, defending against the North.
So remember, from those who did their studying, remember that Robert E. Lee was against Confederacy statues or memorials. He felt that it would be antagonistic to the reunifying the United States.
I didn't
leave that out there.
That he was against memorializing. Yeah. Which, I mean, makes sense based on the words we've read of him, but
yeah, right.
I didn't know. That's kind of funny. Like in light of everything that's going on today.
Yeah. And which I think is the perfect sentiment there. Yeah, so sort of along the same lines there with what you're saying, Landon. Yeah, is he memorialized because he's a good loser? I might lean towards yes. And the reason that I say it is this: I am against Confederate statues is a little bit not quite the right word. I don't think they're a good idea even today. I remember that Yeah, like I remember reading, I think it's when we were getting ready for the Lincoln Gettysburg Address episode, reading some articles and somehow in 1870 it came up, and the North and Union sympathizers, which a good American said, like, absolutely not, you're traitors. And it wasn't until like 1930 or so, I think, that when the lost cause idea started to gain more ground. But yeah, I think that Robert E. Lee's sentiment there is right on, where it's like it's not useful to promoting national unity. I think another useful parallel that just fits in like the exact same breath, I feel like. I was talking to my buddy Eric, who was down in Arkansas this past summer, where obviously there's a lot of rebel flags that are flown. And there's obviously a lot of people, and this ties into something we haven't gotten into, which I think would be nice to get into. It was in Landon's notes. It's like the rebel flag is used, certainly, just as the war was not just about slavery for Robert E. Lee. I mean, it really wasn't at all, obviously, for him. But he accepted that it was ultimately about that. The rebel flag stands for a certain way that Southern people are with being honorable, at least towards other white people for a lot of them. It's just a certain sort of Southern culture, right? That there is a lot of good things to it, which the rebel flag stood for because of historical circumstances that they ended up with their own flag. But for, as my friend Eric stated, it's like for virtually any African American who drives through a town and sees a rebel flag, they're not going to feel welcome, like, just period. And so, like, for that reason, like, you have to say, for that reason, it's just not a good idea. Whether it's flying a rebel flag, like, calling them a racist is way too far. Like, that's not, maybe they're racist, maybe not. Same with, like, Confederate statues there. Like, do they memorialize him being a good loser? Yeah, I think there is a lot to that. But are they a good idea? I stand with Robert E. Lee on this one. No. Ironically.
Yeah. I don't think that was a hypothetical question. I doubt they were ever. The reason I even asked that question was because I think Gerald Ford reinstated Lee's citizenship in like 1970, whenever Gerald Ford was president.
75.
So, like, post civil rights, and granted, I mean, probably a white Southerner, but there was like a very recent, he, like, there's reasons to always like keep him top of mind. Like, we had this conflict. He had some of the right ideology, and then he chose the wrong side, and then like he at least wasn't the reason Reconstruction failed. If all of his ideals for how the 20 years post-war should have gone, we'd probably be in a different place. Like, he was actually pretty aligned with Lincoln on how to like resolve all this. It's just he and Lincoln died way too soon, and it didn't go the right way. But yeah, I thought the reason I asked, like, is there a reason to still memorialize him? We recently did it. We've recently taken them all of it down too. What else were you going to say? Someone had another pivot.
Yeah, so we're talking a lot about how to lose with dignity. So two things I wanted to do real quick before I asked my question. I was going to just read. So I think our friends over at the Art of Manliness had a nice post on how to lose with dignity. So I was going to read their 7 things, and I kind of had a joke. But anyway, so this is what they said, how to lose with dignity. Accept responsibility for the loss. Bow out gracefully. Acknowledge the winner. and in some cases even support the winner, learn from the loss and move on. And as I was reading those, it's like, Robert E. Lee did pretty much every one of those things. And it just kept hitting me. It's like, that's like the complete, I just kept picturing Donald Trump after losing the last election. I was like, he did the complete opposite of every point. Like, not even one of them, every single one. And it just.
Man, what do you think it'll take to get Donald Trump on the Art of Manliness podcast? I think it would break the United States.
I mean, that one point, bow out gracefully, that's just like literally Lee's. Like, nobody bows anymore. Like, do you bow? Like, Lee bowed as he like halted the horseback, but you don't actually bow.
It is, without riding the Trump horse too much, it is because there is like this interesting, I guess paradigm is just the right word for it. Obviously a lot of the Art of Manliness, for those who don't know, it's this secular platform. Secular platform run by a gentleman named Brett McKay, who's pretty devout Mormon.
I was going to say he's
like.
something. Yeah, he's Mormon.
But content is presented and organized in a way that makes it accessible to atheist, agnostic, or Jewish, Christian, Hindu, just any man, or woman too, but generally men who are just interested in becoming more virtuous, disciplined, better fathers, sons, brothers. And there's certainly, like, you don't need too much of a brain. I certainly don't have all that much brain to acknowledge that, like, that's a significant overlap than a lot of this same individuals who still abide under the Trump flag. And as Ross, it's like, come on, you have to at the very least acknowledge, of course, President Trump did none of those things that Robert E. Lee did, that the Lose with Dignity article suggested. And it's like, man, like, what do you make of that? Like, how, yeah, I don't know. We don't necessarily need to run with that, but it's just something to, like, I've certainly spent a lot of time thinking about over the last.
Another example of doing the opposite of those things, and this isn't necessarily losing, like, the game itself, but it has started to bother me the last year or two to watch coaches in sporting events absolutely lose it at the officials.
Sure.
In baseball, I understand it's like part of the game. They're doing it intentionally. Like basketball, they're probably trying to get the crowd into it and get players to play. It's like there's like intentionality to it, but still, like, and again, like, if I'm watching a basketball game with my son who's 6 years old, and I'm a big Illini basketball fan, like when Brad Underwood he doesn't lose it necessarily more than any other coach, but like when there was a game. See, he loses it his own players actually more than the refs.
That's probably true.
Last year, the Ohio State game, he lost it. Out on the court, just screaming, 2 techs ejected, rightfully so. And as if my 6-year-old's watching that with me, it's like, what do you tell him? Go, yeah, that's a guy. We're paying him a lot of money. We like him, because we win. But like, that's not, and it's just like, and I don't know. I don't have yeah, that's the only way to say it, I guess. And it's made me even think, like, when I watch the sporting events, like Matt, you mentioned at the beginning that you're not good at losing, like how much I hate it. Like if a call goes against us, how quick I am to like accuse the ref as a terrible call that's going to mess up the game. And it's just like, I don't know. It's not something about me that I like, but I don't know, just giving another example of the world today where people don't lose well.
So, do you have someone, Landon?
Painting a very broad stroke. It's like the locality of neighborliness has been overrun by the nationality of like our ideologue. We could dig into that, but
yeah, something sort of relevant. I feel like that. So I was driving to Aldi this evening, to the grocery store, and there's a guy who was next to me, and his bumper sticker which of course have become like sacramentals in our day and age. It said, you can burn the American flag, but make sure you wrap yourself in it first, right? And being a little bit of what's the word we're looking for? Stereotyping this guy. Like there's a pretty good chance he's a conservative Christian. But like, dude, like you're basically implying that you would like these basically just any far left person. Like you want them to kill themselves. That's exactly what you're saying. And that's obviously so antithetical to like, come on, that's it. If not mortal sin, like that's grave matter. Everywhere you drive, you are wishing suicide upon someone in the far left, is my interpretation of that. And even if this guy, I'm not going to say gentleman, this guy is, even if he is someone who goes to church semi-regularly, is he really immersed in the very Christian culture that he is in some sort of like goofy way trying to like advance? And of course, like the answer is like no. It's like I don't know. It's just this. I think that there's so much to be said for like a real fear of hell. If this guy really feared hell, if he really feared hating his fellow human, I don't think he'd have that bumper sticker or the billion other things stupid crap that comes up on social media or other bumper stickers.
All right, so Matt, I would like you to tie Ross watching a kid with his son, a Illini game referee overture to far left burning flag, hell on our mind, and fearful. Could you just tie that together for us and back into Robert?
Of course,
Lee's
I was
speech.
just about to. I mean, but yeah, I'll do my best. So one thing, so I mentioned in the outline, Claire and I have been on like this chess kick for like 2 weeks. Like we'll play chess with each other, and neither of us are good, right? Like neither of us really have a particular strategy other than trying to think like 2 or 3 moves ahead. Like, don't move here because they'll do this, and I'm stupid. Very rudimentary. Anyway.
Look, Matt's already making excuses, calling himself stupid. Win better than this, Matt.
So anyway.
Or who's better than this? Darn it.
But yeah, there have been very trying times where I'm like, holy smokes, like I stink at losing. And I actually need to get this under control before Abe is old enough to see me lose like this, And which I think kind of comes to something I mentioned earlier about how when you're in the midst of a loss, like it comes up on you, right? Like sometimes, yeah, you might see it coming or whatever, but like, obviously I don't play chess in order to lose, right? I try to win. And when it starts really turning, like, oh crap, I just made a bunch of dumb moves, or like Claire just made a bunch of great moves, whatever. Like, yeah, like this feeling just bubbles inside me. And there's like something that needs to be in place ahead of time to overcome that. And that's where I think like what Ross's situation with his, just like those are the opportunities to like, I mean, not that you moralize over every basketball game you watch, right? That would be really boring and annoying to have my dad moralize about things every time we watched a college basketball game. But yeah, to at least have like, just think about, okay, when I lose in chess, I need to like try to instantiate the things I want Abe to know and do, right? And that takes virtue, right? And that takes immersing yourself in I would say like a more solidly Christian identity, which involves thinking about the bumper stickers on your car, which involves, besides like just involves you thinking beyond just like, this seems like a, stick it to 'em bumper sticker, like, sure, maybe emotionally gratifying to like, suckers, but like, just think like 2 steps, like what you're actually saying and what you're doing and like, what does that represent and whatnot. So yeah, I guess maybe that's my best way of connecting them. But those are thoughts that have been kind of percolating.
Yeah.
Throughout, and just like, yeah, that virtue needs to be in place ahead of time, because like sometimes that comes on quick and you lose quick, and like, shoot, now you need to figure things out.
I feel like it's easy, like in your example of the chess, at least for myself, like when you recognize that you're trying to lose well, it's easy to come off or like that I don't care. You know what I mean? I think it's just hard to genuinely capture hey, I really wanted to win. It's not that I don't care, yet I'm still gonna act a certain way.
The thing that sort of stuck out to me with what you're saying, Matt, that I don't know, it's sort of rambly, but it's sort of not too at the same time. So I've been watching the TV show Friday Night Lights recently, figuring out how this game of football or football, how do you pronounce that?
Get you one of these.
Get you one of these, Ross is doing the video. And, it takes place in Texas, and abortion has come up several times, and as well as premarital sex, right? And like one of the things, like I sort of, obviously it's a TV show, right? So they're trying to like create drama, which is legitimate to some extent, but at the same time, you're still watching it. You're like imagining, like, okay, if this was my child, like, what are the things I would say if I mean, I'll say he or she wanted to get an abortion, because obviously a guy can encourage that for sure. I don't know, for some reason, in terms of, I guess, what Matt was saying, like, how do you prepare yourself before you're in this situation to be a loser? How do you prepare yourself before that? And, when in relation to the show, it's like having an abortion, like that's a losing side of the coin, right? And I'm thinking about, like, man, what would I say to let's keep it simple, to my daughter when we're dealing with these questions of premarital sex or possibility of having an abortion, and it sounds goofy, it sounds foofy, it's not intellectual, but it reminds me of something that Monsignor Brownsy would do. He'd, for the non-Catholics who'd come for communion, he'd put his hand on your shoulder and he'd say, "Jesus loves you, and so do I." It's so simple, but it just gets to you. It gets to you in this very deep way. And I think that all of us hearing those kinds of things from the people we love, God loves you, so do I. It's not fancy. It's not Jordan Peterson and some 10-minute YouTube video with inspirational music. It's just a reminder of who you are and how powerful that can be in preparing you before those moments to lose. So
I think it ties in pretty well to like you kind of talking about these situations, especially with kids, and like preparing yourself to lose. So I do think there's something like you shouldn't, ever try to lose, right? I mean, maybe if you're playing like a kid in a game, yeah, I'm sure you can find a situation where it's fine to like let somebody beat you. But as a general rule, right, I think you're not gonna like lose on purpose. But that being said, I don't know. I just think like, is it good to let our kids lose sometimes? Like you kind of said, like, to prepare you. So I kind of think about that. Like if a kid, like it's kind of that, if you can't master yourself in the small things, you're not going to be good at the big things. Or if I can't trust you in small matters, I can't trust you in big, whatever that line was. But so I kind of think about with kids, like, okay, if we're expecting them, in this case, to lose a war, well, with how many hundreds of thousands of people that died, but whatever it might be, you don't get the job offer, the girl says no, whatever. Like if we're going to prepare ourselves, is it almost good to let kids lose when they're young? to get them, because everybody loses sometimes. That's what they tell me. But but I don't know. I think that makes sense. Like, yeah, is it good to let our kids lose?
It doesn't really have the smell of a final bell question, but it's a good question, and we've been going for a while here. So maybe we should just go ahead and make it the final bell. What do you guys think?
Do you have other final bells, or is this it?
I didn't have a good final bell. I do think this is maybe worth addressing slightly more in response time than a regular final bell, but I'm okay with that kind of finishing it.
Look, yeah, if somebody comes up with something, fine, we'll go. Yeah.
Okay. Final bell.
Ding, ding, ding.
Ding, 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 ding.
Final bell.
15. One more round. There's no stopping this now. This is our round. Don't stop it now. You start, we don't stop. All your strength, all your power, all your love, everything you've got. This is all right there. You're young.
Okay, we're back. Ross, remind us. Final bell question here. Bring us home.
Is it good to let our kids lose?
And maybe a little bit of commentary on society today. Do we let, in the same vein, do we let our children lose often enough?
Right. Yeah. I think Matt addressed it a little bit in kind of his chess game mentality. That made me think of golf. I do come back to golf. I think when I reflect on times I've lost in my life, there's a couple like sentimental, maybe fluffier instances, but I think I'm confronted with a lot of emotion and just like psychological loss sometimes in like golf matches or playing with like a bunch of friends. Like you want to like perform in that environment, and you think you can play this well, but you almost never do. And the litmus test for like my judge of character sometimes is like when I golf with people, like even if they're very, 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 very bad and like can barely make contact with the ball, like how do they react, or how do they like you're never golfing because you're playing well. Like only the pros do that. Like it is 4 or 5 hours of just being outside, kind of playing a recreational sport with someone, and it's really about like the company. And for me, it's often like I can forget that a lot. Like other people get caught up in performing. And I think that that's probably the best example of like, how do you lose well? Because like pretty much everybody always loses when they play golf. And yeah, I think we don't fight wars anymore. Fortunately, like thank God we aren't asked to do that several times in our life. Golf's like one minor thing, perhaps like chess, that mirrors maybe sentiments and physical performance that are just hard to overcome or perfect. So I think
before you judge me too much, Landon, some of us are so bad it's actually embarrassing though.
Yeah, but still, just like the how do you lose well? It's like you're still having so much fun and value like the conversation and the camaraderie that goes with it, rather than like how exactly the outcome of that shot went. And I think that, restate the question one more time, Ross, and I'll just bring it home.
Is it good to let our kids lose? And Mike had a slightly, what was the other one?
And does society do enough to help?
Do we let them lose enough?
Or what?
Yeah.
Of course, it's great to let our kids lose. I think the word that often comes, I have a almost 6-month-old son, and like, sometimes when he's crying and it's like kind of a wussy cry, to be frank, it's like, I can tell you're not.
6-month-old son.
There's
like,
such a thing. I totally get what you're saying.
You're not like, like, I just changed your diaper. You're not hungry. You don't need a nap. And like, that's definitely a wussy cry.
Heard it here first on the speech guide.
Like you're more learning to talk than you are like in distress right now. That's like the balance of cry. And like the word that I often think of is like, how can I teach or convey like how to be resilient? And it's not like losing. It's just how can I teach how to be resilient? And I think that is needed more. And maybe you're not supposed to do that with 6 months olds. I don't. It crosses my mind for like, what do I do when he's 5? But it's starting to creep in.
Health and Human Services is going to be knocking on your door on Monday late.
I mean, I would say I'd totally back that up. And I know the sissy cry. I get what you're saying. Like, their needs are met. For Abe, especially since he's kind of in the very early stages of walking and falling and hitting his head and things. Just, how you react definitely dictates how they react, which is kind of a funny reality. So if you're like, whoa, that was fun, he's like, oh, okay, that's, whatever. But do we let our kids lose? I mean, or is it good to let our kids lose? I mean, yeah, I think there's, that's the short answer. Like, is absolutely, it's a good thing. Kind of stress test that. No one's good on their first try, or hardly ever are we good on our first try of something. And certainly not in things that, just in different virtues, or things that require a combination of virtues. Does society allow our kids to lose enough? I mean, I don't know. I feel like losing is going to happen naturally. Like, I don't know if our society is really to blame for people losing too much or too little.
Ooh, that's a good point.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, everyone's going to lose in some way, shape, or form. And
probably big time, too.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, like, maybe the better question is, like, does society structured in such a way that, like, losing will be, like, losing will be harnessed, the energy of a loss will be harnessed in a positive way. And I don't know. I mean, I would say insofar as, like, we distance ourselves from God, we're going to distance ourselves from what it means to be human and what it means to be a virtuous person, and like to have what it takes to lose gracefully. So I would say insofar as we, head that route, like, I don't know if kids are going to lose as well.
So some of the knee-jerk reaction thoughts that sort of come to me here. It's important to teach your children how to lose. Yeah, okay, obviously, yes. But how might one go about doing that? I think the sort of like things that stick out to me that I don't feel are really built up or constituted within the default setting for children training. Or it's like you're just sort of like a little weird if you were to have these kinds of conversations. Weird in a general sense of the word, just significantly far off from average. But like, how do you prepare for your children to lose faith in God? Or what do you do when, you feel like you're not good at your job? Or when you're losing a sense of comfort? Like, is kind of another interesting way to put it. And obviously, like, all of these different conversations, like, every single person, there is not a single person who has ever existed who did not have those kinds of thoughts. I mean, even Christ losing faith in God, shoot, what what did he say in Gethsemane?
My God, my God.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I feel like the default setting is just to like act as if these are never going to happen. You just figure them out on your own, you just keep them to yourself. But, I think the challenge, of course, is that those kinds of questions, like, for one person, that particular question might not come until they're 70. And for another person, that particular question might come up when they're 7, right? And then everything in between for all the other ones. And so it can make kind of presenting the nature and presenting antidotes to each of those questions sort of like awkward or just confusing even. at different times. But the alternative is just living in this, as was it Henry David Thoreau, quiet lives of desperation, just acting as if there's this whole other fraction of existence doesn't exist, when of course it does, right? But people just end up keeping those things to themselves and not really figuring out what the tools they need to bring to those moments of loss, which, as Matt so aptly said, are inevitable. But what is not inevitable is resolving them in ways that advance us towards holiness and being who we need to be for those around us.
I think I kind of referenced it earlier, but then you guys have done a good job at, talking about the ways that we will inevitably lose in life. One thing we didn't really touch on, though, that I just feel like you can always take it to like a higher pitch, So girl says no on a date, you don't get the job you want. Oh, you actually get fired from a job. Like, you can just keep going up and up, right? War is pretty high on the list. I mean, something we didn't really talk about, which the quad, but, the kind of unfair suffering, if you will. My kid got leukemia. I mean, my kid, if someone's child dies of leukemia or something like, just why in the world would something like this happen? So when we think about these kind of moments in life where things don't go our way, it just seems impossible to handle them well if you haven't learned how to handle the smaller ones first. So I think it is important. I don't want to say like force your kids to lose, but when inevitably they do lose at something, to let them lose and be okay with that. It seems like needed practice for later in life.
Sometimes you just have to destroy your kids in basketball just to teach them a lesson.
And then you can tell them you're welcome at the end of it.
I mean, that sounds silly. And of course you wouldn't want to do that like all the time. But yeah, I mean, every so often, just make it clear you're an 8-year-old boy or girl and you suck. Funny. Keep them humble.
We had what was that? The Art of Manual, 7 points of how to be a good loser.
How to lose with dignity was the blog post.
So 7 points.
You want them?
Yeah, and then let's rate Robert E. Lee, and then we'll rate the next 3. See how we go. Did he have all 7? Did he have 5? Did he have 4? And then whoever we pick for the next speeches, did they have 7 or not?
Accept responsibility for the loss.
Don't think out loud. Think to yourself first.
I just said
right?
No, number 1. I didn't say how I scored it.
Chill out.
That's the metric, not the opinion. I don't know that he did. Hold on. Let's just do that one by consensus. Did he accept responsibility? I don't know if he did.
I just don't know. I don't feel like I don't know enough.
I feel like we're getting a little long here. I like the idea, but if we go
then just
pretty lengthy.
Yes,
quick
he
fire.
did, because he tried to resign. He tried to resign from General-in-Chief.
All right.
So yeah, I would say so. After
bow out gracefully.
Definitely.
Yeah,
that was
that was
invented
easy.
for him.
Yeah. Acknowledging the winner.
Yep.
I mean, yeah, pretty clear.
I think so.
Totally.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
And in some cases, even supporting the winner.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I would say, by not wanting his statues up.
I don't know. I mean, did he? I mean, he didn't serve in Congress.
But, like, he wasn't
But
allowed
he
to.
didn't want his statue put up.
Yeah, he told people not to
Oh
fight.
yeah,
he
wasn't
told
a
people,
citizen.
like,
Okay, I mean, okay, certainly not a no.
Learn.
I'm just trying to be critical here.
Shut up, Mike. Learn from the loss and move on.
Definitely.
All right.
That's actually all it says. There's only 5.
There's 5?
You gotta read part 2.
What?
I mean,
Oh,
5's
there's
good enough.
part
We
2.
don't need a ton.
That's all right.
But
We'll go.
so
with
he
5.
was a
That's good.
5-star loser. Is that fair to say?
5-star loser.
That's great.
Oh man. All right, so we know
right.
how to lose now. We know
Yep,
it's important
we
to
know how to
lose.
lose.
We know how to lose in war, but
Is there any other way to
how do
lose,
we
Mike?
lose in how do we lose in love? That's what we've got going on next episode when Chuck Nolan, You guys
Chuck
might
Norris?
remember him. Played by Tom Hanks in the 2000 film by Robert Zemeckis, Castaway.
Ooh.
Tomorrow the sun will rise, and who knows what the sun will bring. Tide will bring. But, man, it's been great. You guys have anything else to add?
I think we're good.
Okay. Thanks for listening. Thanks for drinking.
And thinking.
With us.
Landon, you can say, be safe out there.
Be safe out there.
Okay. Super. Cue the music.
Come and go. Look toward the horizon. Up ahead you'll find a peace of mind, relief from the trying. I have burned a bridge, wrecked in a ditch, had to ask forgiveness. Dead ends come and go. Look toward the horizon. Oh, there are stories to tell. The times we grew and the times we fell. Oh, I've been afraid some days, but the road will lead us to a better place. Road will lead us to a better place.